Welcome to another edition of the Sports Media Professionals Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Springer. On today's episode, I'm joined by Tyler Kuehl, a play-by-play broadcaster and news radio personality in Michigan. In this episode, Tyler would talk about his experience in play-by-play, a story about how a fan or a parent came up and gave him a little bit of advice after a broadcast and gave him an interesting gift, and more on this episode. Hope you enjoy. Tyler, thank you so much for joining me today, for being on the show today, and just how are you doing today? How are you doing?
Well, Nick, it's cloudy, it's rainy here in West Michigan. Literally, the weather we've had, I don't know about your neck of the woods, but it's like it's been Seattle for like the last week and a half here. Like gloomy, wet, rainy, mixture of snow falling. It's so I guess you can say it's an April in Michigan. I guess the best way we can describe it. But other than that, though, pretty good. How about yourself?
That's good. Yeah, I'm doing well. Actually, funny story today in San Antonio, which is where I'm at. It's also kind of rainy and gloomy today. So, I'm joining you, I guess, in that aspect.
That's one thing about Texas. I was in Dallas last year. Like it'll be hot, crazy, whatever. But then as soon as it rains, it rains.
Yeah. But I think tomorrow it's going to be like 95, which, that's a bit too hot for me, but yeah. So.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
Yeah. But Tyler, just go ahead and tell me what you do now, kind of what your job is and what your day-to-day life looks like in sports right now.
Oh, well, it's in a weird spot. It's kind of like the beginning of my off season, if you will. And by off season, I mean one less job to worry about. So I'm mainly a play-by-play sports broadcaster. At least that's, my main focus is. Unfortunately, though, not a whole lot of spring sports on the calendar this year, just with a couple of things misjudged here and there. And so right now, my daily routine is going to work as a news anchor for a local radio station here in Grand Rapids, the top news station in the area, which is kind of cool. I get to see a lot of different people, get to see a lot of the DJs and whatnot. But I'm also a writer, a sports writer for mlive.com, which is, I guess you can say, the online newspaper for the majority of the major markets here in Michigan. And I pretty much write about all the big sporting events that go on daily. And so it's kind of cool. It's opened the doors, allowed me an opportunity to cover like the Olympics. I got to cover the NCAA tournaments that are wrapping up here, both the men's and women's, the hockey tournaments as well. And of course, a couple of the local teams here. But play-by-play broadcasting, I guess, is my main thing. I just got wrapped up with the hockey season, which has been my main focus. As you can probably tell by, if you see my Gordie Howe banner, my Hockey Hall of Fame banners behind me here in my studio, my office/studio. And so, yeah, it's been a whirlwind of the last 2 months, because I think since I'd say mid-February, I think I've called at least, with a couple of tournaments mixed, I think I've called like 75 games over the last month and a half. So that was, it's been a little busy. So it's nice to kind of relax a little bit. I wish the weather would cooperate so I can get my golf game going, but other than that, it's not too bad.
Yeah. I mean, you just said it right there, 75 games over the past 2 months. As you know, sports it's not a 9-to-5 job. How do you kind of use that? How do you kind of have that work-life balance, knowing that you might have to give up some weekends with games and whatnot? How do you kind of keep your balance with work and life?
I don't know. My wife's probably the best one to ask about that, how I try to manage the two. Using the Rover app for our dog, one thing, so someone can watch our dog whenever I go out on the weekends and whatnot. It's, thankfully a lot of games I don't typically do a whole lot during the week, which is nice. So the week is spent pretty much doing prep work for weekend games. I was fortunate enough to go to St. Louis last month to do the ACHA national tournament, both for the men's and women's divisions, club college hockey, for those that don't know. That I was gone for 10 days for, and I was also doing the state championships here in Michigan before that. So I was out of the house for 12 days, which we relied on some family members around the area to come by and watch the dog for a little bit, take her overnight sometimes, because my wife, she's actually a nurse, a third shift nurse at one of the local hospitals here in Grand Rapids. So she works, 36, 40 hours a week, all throughout the night. So someone needs to come in and watch the dog. So, but it's trying to find work-life balances. It was easy when I first started, because I was just broadcasting. And doing like a daily 9-to-5 job. And I was able to kind of work that out, because once again, games are on the weekend. So once I started doing the radio stuff, where my schedule is relatively routine, sometimes a chink gets thrown in here or there. But, just whenever you have a moment of downtime, just sit on the couch, relax, play with the dog. It's not easy. At first, it was kind of an adjustment trying to get used to realizing, I might not go to bed until 2:00 this morning because of the fact I have to work or whatever, get some writing done or make sure I get the daily reports done for whatever I'm doing. And then going and getting up and going to work again. Like it was a little tough, but it's what we all want to do. I mean, I keep telling my wife the goal is to have one job one day. And even then I probably will still not get the recommended amount of sleep that most health professionals give. So, just finding time whenever you have a moment to relax, finding an opportunity to sit on the couch with the missus and, have a drink or two and watch whatever she wants to watch, because sometimes that's why I also moved out my TV that I had in my office, moved it out there so she can watch what she wants to watch on the big screen. I get to watch the game on the slightly smaller screen. Everyone's happy.
So what kind of got you into sports broadcasting? How did you find yourself interested in pursuing this kind of line of work?
Well, I played hockey. I've been playing since I was 5 years old, and I loved hockey since I was born. I grew up in a family that was hockey fanatic. My dad was a big Red Wings fan, Michigan football, Michigan hockey fan and whatnot. So sports were all around all season. My dad, I won't say he wasn't the biggest into baseball. I picked that up a little bit more myself in the summer months because, there was not a whole lot of hockey. And, and I mean, when I was born, Nick, there wasn't really the NFL network. So it was either, it was very hard on the season. So ESPN would only cover baseball in the summer, maybe some NFL news, maybe some hockey news. Back then they were a little bit better than they are today, but that's a story for a different time. But, I always loved watching games and, hearing broadcasters, because here in Michigan, I was fortunate enough I was born in the Dave Strader era of the Detroit Red Wings, but I was too young before he moved on nationally. Got to obviously hear a lot of his work for ESPN, unfortunately, before he passed a few years ago, doing national games for NBC. But I got to hear Ken Daniels and Mickey Redmond every other night, or if I was in the car, it was Ken Cal on the radio. And then, if we were ever in Detroit for a tournament or whatever, we were able to get the CBC feed on Saturday nights. So we got to listen to Bob Cole on Hockey Night in Canada. And I always liked just listening to the guys. And Gary Thorne, of course, was another inspiration that I just loved listening to. I'm like, man, these guys they bring something more than just going to a game. I live in Grand Rapids, so I've been going to Griffins games since the franchise, was originated. And, going to games is fun. It's awesome being a part of the fans, but a great broadcaster makes it that much better. And there was one game I went with an old teammate of mine, and it was against Manitoba, the Manitoba Moose. This would have been their first incarnation. And they played there was the month where the Griffins, every Saturday night, they played a Canadian team. So they had this Hockey Night in Canada theme for the month. And so we rolled up our little programs, and my buddy and I called a game. We're 8 years old, right? So we probably stunk, but I'd gone to enough games. I knew all the Griffins, and they played Manitoba a lot. And I knew a lot of the other, the Moose as well. And couple of the guys in front of us, I don't know if they had one too many pops in their system, but they're like, man, you sound pretty good. And well, thank you. And then, I said to myself, if I can't make it playing, why not give it a shot? And so once I realized that my playing days wasn't really taking me much further than a little past semi-pro, I decided I was going to get into broadcasting. And I guess you can say the rest has been history for the last 4 years now.
How important was playing, do you think, in kind of getting you in a position where you thought you wanted to continue to broadcasting, playing the game? How important was that in terms of you ended up getting into broadcasting?
I think it was very important because, whenever I talk to other broadcasters, you typically hear, for most of them, at least that are in the NHL, they either grew up fans or they grew up, surrounded by the game, following the game. But one of my favorites is as I got older, I became more of a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. That's a very long story that we probably don't have time for today, but I listened to a lot of Joe Bowen. We had the NHL Center Ice package on DirecTV. I shouldn't be name dropping companies here, but that's how I got exposed to the Leafs. And I listened to Bowen because at the time he was calling games for TV, and I just loved listening to him. And knowing that he was a former goaltender like myself before he got into broadcasting made me realize it gave me a perspective that I don't want to say not all broadcasters have, because guys that are in the game for long enough, eventually you just pick up on how the game's played. But jumping right in my first year, 2 years out of college, college dropout, but 2 years out of playing for Davenport, my first game at Davenport University, it took a minute to get with the flow of the game on how to describe it. But in terms of being able to analyze it, because, a lot of us at that level are calling games by ourselves, you kind of have to be your own color guy. Yeah. And it helped, being able to describe, hey, nice play here by Evan Carroll setting up Trevor Murray in the slot. Here's how that play developed, instead of just, describing Carroll to Murray in a shot and a save. Like, it added an extra element, I believe in. And that's why, I also say people, if you can play other sports when you're a kid as well, it's, even if for just being an athlete, playing multiple sports is important, to being able to look at games differently. Cause I played baseball growing up. So when I started doing baseball and softball games, I was, I kind of understood what happened, how the play happens and whatnot. It wasn't just there's a ground ball to the shortstop, throw it to first. I could just say, I'm like, that's a good read by the shortstop because they saw this, stuff like that. So, it brings an extra element. And I'm not saying everyone has to play a sport before they be a broadcaster, because you can be a good play-by-play guy without playing the game. Gary Thorne is one of those guys. Gary Thorne was not a hockey guy before he started calling games for the Jersey Devils back in the 80s, but he became one of the greatest hockey broadcasters of all time. I just, for starting in a sport right away, it kind of gave me, I guess, I don't want to say an edge, but it helped me out a little bit, especially in the early years.
So once you got into broadcasting, was there ever a specific moment where you just kind of sat back and thought, okay, yes, I'm in the right place. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is where my career is supposed to go. Did you ever have that moment where you just kind of sat back and thought, yeah, this is where I'm supposed to be at?
I'd love to say right away, but thank goodness my footage of that first game I called for, it was Davenport Toledo in October of 2017. And thank goodness they flipped the platform over for the Davenport Athletic Network, because that game was horrendous. I remember listening back to it once. I listened for 5 minutes and I said, what the heck am I doing? But I would say, actually, and even though that first year I did have a highlight reel that I ended up trashing a couple of years back because I thought it was good my first year, but there was a lacrosse game we had, my brother and I, actually, because he was a student at the time, we were fortunate enough to call all the lacrosse games together. He had played lacrosse, so he was my color guy and also the camera operator because he was a student worker, and I got to call the games. It was pretty cool for him and I to call games together. And the last game of the season, it's senior day, for our women's lacrosse team. And there was a guy that just walks up into our booth. And it wasn't like it's, it wasn't like we were stuck in the bleachers. Like, we have an actual press box there at Davenport at a lacrosse stadium. And this guy walks up and he said, all right, who's the broadcasters here? And I'm like, oh dear Lord. My first thought, like, you get compliments, whatever, but when someone walks up straight up into your booth and says something like that, we immediately thought we were in trouble. And it was this guy whose daughter played on the team at Davenport. And he comes up and says, we're from Ontario. We listen to every game. And I just want to say, you guys are amazing. You guys are awesome. Yada, yada, yada. And he gave us treats. It was kind of funny. He, I gave my brother like the bunch of like the little Reese's peanut butter cups. And he said, this is for the sweet commentary. And for you, Tyler, here, he gave me like a bag of like cheese curls. And he's like, these are for all of your cheesy remarks and cheesy comments and whatever. I'm like, you know what? Maybe I can do this sort of thing. Like, little things like that just kind of, literally carries me to this day. Cause like, it doesn't matter what the viewership ratings might say. You just know that there's someone watching, there's someone listening out there that, they might enjoy it. And, sometimes you get rewarded. It might be in a job, it might be in cheese curls, but, stuff like that is kind of made me realize, like, you know what, it's fun. The team was not that good at all. I'll say that, but it was fun to do it. And you know what, it kind of paid off because it, opened some doors with some other opportunities later on down the line.
What kind of attributes would you say if someone wanted to pursue sports broadcasting or sports media, what kind of attributes does that person need to have in order to make it in this industry? I mean, what kind of attributes do you think are important for somebody in sports media?
Being able to be energetic, but know when to use it. My first couple of years, especially in hockey, you want to try to be there for when a goal is scored. You want to make sure there's a big save and you get really excited, and it could be game 7 of a 30-game season. And, I remember I had a great conversation once with Todd Crocker, who is the Toronto Marlies play-by-play broadcaster, the AHL affiliate for the Maple Leafs. And I sent him my demo after my first season. And he said, Tyler, you have a great base. However, you got to calm down a little bit. Not every goal has to be a stellar one, but, certainly be there for the play, but don't make it sound like every game is game 7. and he said, like, I had that problem as well. Cause he'd grown up through the ranks, broadcasted in Hamilton in the Ontario Hockey League or the American League as well. I called junior hockey for many years. And he said, I finally got to a point where I was comfortable with, my inflection of my voice and, being able to be energetic and be entertaining as well, being able to think off the cuff. That's another thing too, is, you can write down all of your notes, all of your prep work as possible. But when a play happens, and I don't try to throw too many dad jokes into a broadcast, because obviously depending on the game, you can do that stuff during the regular season, but doing a national championship game, you have to kind of be, kind of weary. You don't want to make it sound like a comedy act for a meaningful game like that. But, being able to react to stuff on the fly. I like to, I was fortunate enough that in high school, I took a couple semesters of theater arts classes just because, I needed a throwaway hour, and what, hey, let's maybe use this to try to work on, creating a character or being something that can maybe help later on down the line, because it helped me, when you're doing, improv work, improv comedy, you're having to react to whatever's being thrown at you. And so I'm not saying everyone has to go to Second City or something like that in Ontario. You don't have to be a comedian to be a broadcaster, but, being able to think on the fly and come up with new stuff, new material on the go, because eventually your notes, unless you sit there for 4 hours, maybe a day's worth of notes for a 6-inning baseball game or 7-inning softball game, eventually you might run out on something like that. And you have to kind of react and certainly have some fun with it as well. And another thing too, maybe one attribute is, understanding that there are two teams. I myself, I don't say I'm a critic, but I'm a guy that really likes to focus on recognizing, while I might be broadcasting for Davenport, or I might be calling a game for Western Michigan University hockey, hey, we're playing the Denver Pioneers. This team is really good. Here's why. Because there's sometimes I'll tune in, my buddy and I'll be listening to it. We'll be driving somewhere. We'll tune into a football game, whether it be the Big Ten or the SEC, and we'll hear some broadcasters, and you'll know everything there is to know about the Auburn Tigers. But if they're playing Georgia, you might know who the quarterback is, because sometimes they just kind of let that go off to the side. And, I pride myself as being someone that's a unbiased broadcaster. So, being able to recognize, I don't know if it's an attribute or not, but maybe just having some versatility and knowing more than just about your team. So stuff like that, I think, really helps me listen to a game better, watch a game better. I've been criticized a time or two for being too unbiased by certain members of the home team I broadcast for, but I tell them, hey, you know what? There's people on that side that are listening to, and they want to hear about their team. So try to give both sides some love,
Do you find yourself watching or listening to games differently since getting into broadcasting, or do you find yourself viewing games in a different way since becoming a broadcaster?
Unfortunately, yes. 100%. It was so hard too, because like when I was growing up and I was playing hockey, I would go to I'd go to hockey games on a Friday night or Saturday night, or even pro games, junior games, college games, and I would sit there and critique the goaltenders and make it seem like, see, this is why I should be playing at this level, because I wouldn't make that mistake, blah, 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 stuff like that. But, there are games. I fortunately enough, we have the Hulu Live Plus package here in the Kuehl household, and we have ESPN Plus, which gives us almost every NHL game. And I will say thankfully they are kind enough, similar to MLB TV, where they have both regional broadcasters, if it's a regionally broadcasted game. Because there will be some broadcasters that I will have to avoid listening to, because I just, there's little things I don't like about them. And I will, and that's when I can tell people that, especially young broadcasters as well, making mistakes, it'll happen. It's how you react to them is important. When I mentioned how as a goaltender, I would look at a goaltender making mistakes, say, I wouldn't make that mistake. I see that, and I see what, he does. And I see other broadcasters, they'll make mistakes a time or two. And I can never say, I will never make that mistake when I get there. Because then I go the next day and I'm calling, there was an overtime game at Davenport. We tied it up late. And I remember I completely said the wrong defenseman's name that took the shot from the point, who ended up scoring the goal. And it made me sound like a complete doofus, but that's what I'm saying. Like, being able to quickly react and, not necessarily fix your mistake, but try to continue on with your cadence. And that's something too, for young guys and young gals that are in this industry, it's not being afraid to make mistakes, because you sit there and try to not make a mistake. In hockey, for example, it's like when you're squeezing the stick too tight, you're going to end up having a wide open net and you're going to miss. If you keep trying to not make mistakes as a broadcaster, if you think, all right, don't get the names wrong, blah, 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 you end up going to make more mistakes because you're so focused on, not getting the name wrong or getting the team wrong that you'll end up missing a play or describing a play incorrectly. And, little things like that. And that's something, when I watch games nowadays, I hear them and I say, that happens at that level. And it happens for me too. That does not mean I'm comparing myself to an NHL broadcaster. Please do not make that assumption at all, because I think it'd be a different story we'd be having right now. But it's something that I watch and I see. I'm like, how each broadcaster calls a game. Like not anyone's the same. We all grew up listening to our favorite broadcasters. We try to emulate them, of course, when we're in the driveway or in the backyard playing. And then we go to our own thing. We're like, I like doing this, what this guy used to do, but however, let me do this instead. Being able to absorb is another thing I do when I watch or listen to games.
If you could go back in time from right now, rewind back to your very first broadcast, your younger self, you're about to walk into the booth or wherever you got for your first broadcast, what would you say to yourself, or do you think your former past would believe where you are right now?
I maybe say a couple prayers for the game. that was because that was like the worst part, because I thought I had a bunch of notes, and I guess another thing too, actually rehearse a game of how you'd call a game beforehand, because it was my first ever broadcast I'd ever done live as a play-by-play guy. Actually, when I was a freshman at Davenport, when I was a third string goaltender, I actually did some color with the guy that was doing games by himself. I'd jump on the mic, I would do my what we call rookie stats for all of us scratches, and I would still be able to call a game, but I was doing color, which is literally just reacting to whatever's going on. Doing play-by-play though, if you can have a chance to sit down and look over your pregame notes, because we had about 10 minutes of pregame before the game actually started, like rehearsing that, being able to go over. So, because I remember just stumbling throughout my entire notes, and I realized after that, I'm like, what, there's a better way to do this. And, nowadays I can literally write down notes and then it just clicks in my head when the light goes on. And after that, it's all met from memory from there. But, my first game, once again, for anyone out there that's wanting to get into this, make sure for something like that, rehearse, because doing play-by-play, once again, very reactionary, being able to say Johnson moves it up now and they come up the court, it goes over to the left elbow for Stevens, you can easily react with that. But before the game, saying how Johnson is a guy that's a leading scorer and one of the top guys in this conference with, averaging 12.5 points per game, so on and so forth. Sometimes that takes a little bit of repetition to make sure it sounds clean, because if you start, kind of going off the walls and sideways a little bit, sometimes, as I like to say, the listener or the viewer is going to be completely confused what's going on and they'll have no idea. And so, if I could go back in time to that game against Toledo, I'll tell myself, hey, don't write your notes down by hand because you write chicken scratch, and maybe rehearse this again a time or two. So when you go into the game tonight, you don't sound like a goofus.
Where do you see yourself in the future? Where do you see yourself kind of continuing to grow as a broadcaster? What are some goals you have maybe for the future for yourself?
Well, the far-fetched goal, maybe the lofty goal, is to call Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. I had that same mentality when I played. I wanted to be an NHL goaltender, and now I want to be an NHL broadcaster. And, what's the old saying, you shoot for the moon. If you miss, you fall amongst the stars or something like that. That's super cheesy, I know, but that's something that, I really want to do. And whether, if I don't make it as an NHL broadcaster, just being a guy that works consistently. I would, love the shot to get at a network one day, to get a few games there. I've been fortunate enough to develop a relationship with Hockey TV, which is an online streaming service, which has given me the chance to broadcast, mention those ACHA national tournaments. I got to do the IIHF men's under 18s last year in Texas. I got to meet a few, I say, high profile folks from TSN while I was there, which is pretty cool. From Canada, they came down, and got something like that. And I'd love to keep going up. I mean, whether if I find a job for a specific team, sure, awesome. That's proven to be a little bit tougher than I would have expected, maybe starting out, but that'd be awesome too. Would I love to call for the Toronto Maple Leafs, for the Detroit Red Wings? Absolutely. But you just got to keep working, and that's what I'm trying to do here. And that's why the off season is a little bit tough, because you're trying to find something to do and trying to find, all right, what's the next avenue I can go on to? But it's like having to play the waiting game, because sometimes it's all you can do is just keep working, keep grinding. And, maybe an opportunity comes up here or there, and, just got to keep knocking on doors and see who answers.
Well, Tyler, good luck to you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Excellent interview. I really appreciate you having you on. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Nick. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.